Hello, and welcome to a very special webcast in which we're going to talk about this important and moving and gripping book, The World That Was Ours by Hilda Bernstein, published by Persephone Books. There's also a bit at the end in which Nicola Beauman, the publisher and founder of Persephone Books, has very kindly spared some time to tell me a little bit about the book and her experience of it. And also Audrey Coleman, who is another anti-apartheid activist in South Africa, has talked a little bit about what Hilda and Rusty Bernstein mean to South Africans today. So to begin with what Emily's Walking Book Club made of this book, we met on Zoom, of course, because of the current situation. And I asked everyone to give it, 2 thumbs up, 1 thumb up, like that, or down. And everybody did that with maybe 1 or 2 just 1 thumbs, but most double thumbs. It was such a positive response to this book. And I think what we particularly enjoyed and welcomed in this book was the way that Hilda Bernstein writes so perceptively about what it's like to stand up for an ideal and also be a mother. This balance of the domestic and the political throughout the book seemed incredibly well done and moving, and it brought up all sorts of questions to us all. I suppose we felt that inevitably there comes a point where there's a conflict between whether you're doing the right thing for your family or the right thing for the bigger cause. And we talked a lot about that in the book. And we also talked, I think it was Stina who really beautifully described it as the courage of quietness. And you were all so astounded by how incredibly brave so many people in this book were, and so many people in South Africa were, and how quiet that bravery was. It wasn't the kind of shouting and protesting. It was just the everyday tiny acts of just living really under such an awful system. I'm going to read a short bit out just because I feel it really captures this idea of balancing the domestic and the political. It's I suppose I should tell you a little bit about what actually happens in the book. So to begin with, it starts off with what it's like to live in South Africa when you're a highly political person, and then her husband Rusty gets arrested and held for 90 days, and then he's brought to trial. So the holding under 90 days, it was a terrible thing. He was in solitary confinement. A lot of the people who were also held under 90 days were tortured really awfully. And then there comes the trial, the Rivonia trial, in 1967, I think that's right, in which Nelson Mandela was one of the people on trial, along with Rusty and some others. And so then there's a chunk of the book that's a little bit like a courtroom drama. What the trial's like, the sort of bravery, the throes of the process. And then after the trial, where Rusty brilliantly gets off, there's an incredibly exciting ending which describes Hilda and Rusty's flight from South Africa, how incredibly difficult it is, how close they come to not making it, and the consequences of that. So this is just the moment when they finally decide they have to leave. So if you have the book, it is on, what page is it on? It's on page 312. So they've just had a phone call, and Hilda says, "I put down the phone and said to Rusty, that was a fishy phone call. I had heard the office sounds in the background. He was obviously consulting someone else because the office sounds were blacked out as he put his hand over the mouthpiece for a few seconds. Neither Rusty nor I mentioned special branch. Rusty said, "Let's get out of the house, take the kids somewhere." I said, "I'll just finish the washing and we'll go." He went into the front room and stood at the window looking out into the street, watchful, tense, smoking one cigarette after another, without taking his gaze off the street. In 15 minutes I heard him call, "Aren't you ready yet?" "Nearly, just a few minutes," I answered. "I'm just putting in the last load of washing." 2 minutes later he called again, this time compelling urgency in his voice. "Hilda, where are you?" "Here in the kitchen." "Get out, quickly, the back way." And I am at the end of the garden, among the trees, as they arrive at both the front and back doors in less than 30 seconds. Somewhere behind me, in a kitchen never to be entered again, the washing machine is going into its rinsing cycle, the pressure cooker sends out its puffs of steam. The children are unaware that I have gone. The bright winter sun illuminates the normality of Saturday morning in a Johannesburg suburb. So yes, it's kind of completely absurd that she's fretting about the washing. I mean, it's a very different comparison, but it reminds me of when I had my most recent baby. It turns out I was just about to give birth. Martha was born at home about an hour after this, or half an hour after this. But I was also hanging up laundry, kind of dealing with these domestic tasks. So I think we all found that very compelling, and what else did we talk about? We talked about how contemporary the book felt, how this situation of living under oppression, of being watched, continues today in places like Russia and China. And of course, given the fact that we're all in lockdown and sort of under house arrest ourselves, we felt we could relate to that feeling of isolation. Although Lara, actually, one of our book club members, sort of made the point that we're not all being watched by secret police, and our lives kind of interfered with really insidiously in the way that they did, which was a really important point. So in general, we thought this was a great book, a really important book, gripping, real. Several of us actually said that they loved it because it gave context and made real and gave them a better understanding of the news that surrounded them in their childhoods, that when they were children in the 60s and 70s and 80s and apartheid was such a thing, this was a chance to revisit it and gain a better understanding of what it was like. So with that, I'm going to leave you, and we're going to move on to Nicola Beauman and Audrey Coleman. And thank you so much. I'd love to know your thoughts if you want to put them in the comments.
She was the greatest person I have ever met, and to actually think about her makes me feel a bit choky because she was so incredible. So if I'm being purely one reads this book on many levels, but the personal level, which sounds very egocentric because I'm leaping straight in with it, but you can edit all this, so it doesn't really matter.
No, go on.
Is that the book begins in 1963, and 1963, I was wearing miniskirts and about to go to university and thinking about nothing but what teenage girls think about. And the only time we thought about South Africa is if we felt virtuous because we didn't buy oranges. And there was Hilda and all those people. Sorry, I have to just stop the phone. Right, I've taken the receiver off the hook.
Oh,
and there was Hilda and people who then came to North London with names that you will have heard of, like Harold Walpy and people like that. People just like you and me, they were so brave. And the first time I read Hilda's book, I just sobbed and sobbed. And of course, there's huge parallels with today. Navalny going back to Moscow, or the people who did stand up to Trump. And actually, are we standing up to the Tory government. So, I mean, what I'm saying is politically, I find the book incredibly moving personally, but also on a much broader level. But the second reason is as literature, that the book is a memoir, but it reads like a novel. And indeed, it reads like a thriller. I'm going to reread it now, having just looked at it just now, but you cannot put it down. I mean, what a unique thing to write a book about a political event in such a gripping way. When we launched Persephone Books, we used to rent church halls, and Chris and I would drive with cakes and books, because then there were only 10 or 20 or 30 books, and you could do that. And when we got there, we'd make the tea in one of those huge urns, you know, and then 30 or 40 people would come. I don't know how we rustled them up, but somehow we did. And then I'd give a little talk, and then they'd buy some books and have tea and cake. And that's how we got our mailing list going, one of the ways. And one day we rented a church hall near Oxford, and Lyndall Gordon, you know, the writer, came, and she brought a friend with her. And the friend said, in a very sweet, modest voice, because Hilda, I've got a recording of her somewhere. She had a most wonderfully modest voice. She wasn't at all sort of bossy. She said, I've written a book. So I said, in fact, she'd written several books. And so I said, oh, I'd love to read it. And of course, when I read it, I was completely overwhelmed. And then she wrote the preface, and then she told us one or two rather sad anecdotes, because we got to know her. Like Mandela was in London once, and he went in an armoured car to visit her in her little house near Oxford. And the armoured car stopped, and the whole kerfuffle. But none of the neighbours ever asked. It sort of showed how incurious the British are, you know.
Well, they were models of people who resisted the apartheid system, and who were idealists who had to leave the country. My brother also had to leave the country on an exit permit. And we were very much in the struggle ourselves. So, of course, we knew that circle. We knew Joe Slovo. We knew all the people who were active. I think they'll go down in history as you know, having opposed apartheid and being active politically. How much the new generation will remember them, you know, I have no idea, because the new generation, I'm afraid, don't know much about our history. They, you know, they're getting on with their lives, and I don't think that the past is adequately covered in history books in South Africa. Uh, you know, many people I speak to have never heard of the Detainee Parent Support Committee, and that's a fairly new thing. Comparatively, that was formed in 1981, and Hilda and Rusty had left the country long before that. So the young generation don't know much about their past, and I wonder how interested they are. You know, people I meet, young South Africans, really not really interested.